Loudly, Mr. Hart. Fill this room with your intelligence. Now, will you give us the facts of the case?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it's like to be called on by the professor in front of the entire class. Hey Legal Eagles, D. James Stone here, teaching you how to think like a lawyer so you can crush law school. One of the things that petrifies most new law students is being cold called by the professor. This is the iconic Socratic method where the professor chooses one poor student and generally throughout the entire class picks on that student to answer questions about a particular case or a particular legal concept, and the professor doesn't stop until that student can no longer answer the questions. So the question is, what should you do about being cold called in a law class? Well, here is my advice. First of all, you have to have the right attitude. The attitude that you should take in most law school classes is that it doesn't matter, but it's a good learning experience. Generally speaking, professors don't grade in-class participation. This can be a real shock to people because often in high school and in college, you will get participation points. But that's generally not the case in law school. And if it is, then it's usually a tiny fraction of your ultimate grade. For the most part, your grade comes from your final exam score and really from nothing else. At least 90% of your grade in most law school classes comes from a final exam alone. So for the most part, although it can be very dramatic and very stressful, what happens in class has absolutely no bearing on what your grade is going to be at the end of the semester. But that being said, there are a lot of things that you can do to prepare for class and to prepare for being cold called. The first I've covered in another video. That's the flipped case method. Check out the links below to the flipped case method. It talks about how to read cases effectively and remember both the facts and the law, and how to stack the reading of the cases and your supplements in such a way that you are guaranteed to remember things better than most students who just simply read a case once or maybe twice. The next thing you can do, which we've also covered in another video, is write a 3-point brief. So generally speaking, we don't believe in writing full-on case briefs the way most people write case briefs in law school. However, we do believe in writing an abbreviated case brief that contains the most important information. And what's important about a case? Well, only the information that you can use on a final exam. And generally that includes the narrative story, the essential story facts of a case, and the black letter law that you might be able to use from that case in an issue spotting hypothetical exam. Those are really the only important parts of a case. And we'd like to summarize that in what we call a 3-point brief. And again, the link to the prior video will be down below. But if you do that, then you will have that for class so that when the professor asks you questions about a particular case, you will have a summary of the most important parts. You won't be writing things like the procedural posture or the historical precedent or all the nonsense that usually goes into a case brief, but you will have the most important parts and you'll be able to get through most of the cold call. And speaking of the questions that a professor is going to ask you in a cold call, there's really only two kinds. So there's only two things you need to worry about. And the two kinds of questions that your professor is going to ask you are either a factual question about the case or a reasoning question about the case. So by a factual question, what I mean is the facts of the particular case that goes into the story of the case. And by the facts of the case, I don't mean what particular court the case was in, what the procedural posture of the case was, what the year of the case, and really even what the name of the case is. What I mean is the narrative story of the case. That's the stuff that you can use. You can make an analogy to it on an issue spotting exam, and it's the part that your professor will really care about in your class. So if you prepare appropriately, you'll be able to answer many of the fact-based questions that your professor will have. However, no one, no matter how well they know the case, will be able to remember every single fact about that case. And that's okay. If you don't remember the particular fact about that case, just tell the professor that you don't recall. And the professor needs to elicit those facts in order to continue with the class. So if you can't remember the particular fact, some nuanced detail about that case, your professor will probably either provide that fact themselves or they will ask another student, because the Socratic method requires that they provide the background factual foundation of that case. So it's okay. No one's going to remember every single fact. That's okay. Just move on. Tell the professor that you don't recall, and you'll continue this conversation. Now, the second type of question that your professor is likely to ask are questions that don't have an answer. These are reasoning questions. These are logic questions. They're best guess questions. There is absolutely no right answer to these questions. So as long as your answer is reasoned or somewhat logical, you'll be fine. And don't worry, the professor is going to pick apart your answer no matter what. But that's the nature of a reasoning or logic question. Just do your best, think about the question, think about your answer, and then give it to your professor, knowing that you're going to get some pushback because that's the nature of the Socratic method. But there is no right answer, so you can go in any direction that you want to. But absolutely, the most important thing to remember is that this is not on the final. Few professors grade participation, so what happens in class, while it might seem scary, it just doesn't matter for the purposes of your grade. And while you might be stressed out in the moment in class, it's water under the bridge and you'll have an opportunity to study all of this information later on. And remember, a lot of your classmates are lost as well. Everyone is in the same boat in law school. It just seems embarrassing when you're on the hot seat, but really everyone is feeling the same way. And I really think that the Socratic method is a lost opportunity. It doesn't really help you learn. In fact, if you're facing a cold call, your brain tends to shut down its memory building functions. My experience is that people who get cold called learn the material worse than those that simply watch. So as a pedagogical tool, cold calling is not great. In fact, it's probably bad. So just know that it's a necessary part of law school for some reason, but you'll get through it because the stakes are low and you'll study all of that information after class. So just don't worry about it. If you want to know more about studying for class, reading cases, the flipped case method, check out this link that I put together where you can download my free guide to cases. It is my gift to you. And if you like this video, please check out this playlist of videos that are guaranteed to help you crush law school. So I'll see you in the next video.